All right, I'm going to give you sort of the full meal deal explanation of how I process Surfer files from start to finish, making sure that everything is checked, coordinate systems are proper, and the export is proper, and then importing it and processing it into ArcGIS. So the first thing I'm going to do is take your file, open that guy. So this is untouched. It's exactly as how you sent it. And yeah, I did confirm that the coordinates are correct. So first thing I do is take a look at what's currently being displayed to get a sense of what needs to be exported. So currently it's this map right here, and so it's these contours. So the first thing I do is check the coordinate system. It's currently not set. So as a rule, I always encourage people to always set their their coordinate system to the proper zone and NAD and all that fun stuff to make sure that anything exported will be retained in the proper referencing system. So we'll just go set. I'm going to go to projected systems, UTM, and North America. And this one is in NAD 83, Zone 11 North. So we'll set that. Okay, so the next thing I do is always, I never assume that what I'm given is accurate. Oftentimes I have poorly set um, base contours, end up with odd numbers and stuff like this. So I just take a look at the contour interval, which you have set as 1, and looking at the values, the smallest is 39.19. So you have it set to 39, which is just fine. So this really only comes into play if you start looking at intervals of 2 or 5 or 4, whatever like that. You would probably want to go with an even number, like 38, for example. Yeah, so I look at this, everything looks fine. The range fits the range of data values, so that's good. Go over here to general, there's not really anything we need to be concerned about there. Yeah, so everything else is fine. Yeah, so we've basically set this grid to the proper UTM zone. We've checked the contour interval, the base contours, and make sure everything is fine. So the next thing that we can do is export the contour line work. So you just highlight the grid of interest, and you go to Map Tools, and then go to Export Contours. So I've created a project for this little test here. And we'll put it right here. So we'll put it into contour shapefile. So you have the option to go into a 3D shapefile or a 2D shapefile. For the most part, for our purposes, 2D shapefile is more than enough. So we'll just save that, and we'll look at that and confirm that. And we'll do it now. So I'll bring up ArcGIS. So it's actually not a bad idea to check one step here to make sure we're in the correct referencing system before we go and do too much. We could do a bunch of exports and then do the checks on the end, but if they're wrong, then we have to redo everything. So it actually makes sense to do this now. So I'll just open one of my projects here, it doesn't matter which. And we'll get rid of this, and we'll bring in my section grid. Actually, I'll bring in the LSDs. Actually, Alberta and LSDs. Okay, so I'll just make it. That's pretty ugly. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll bring in that shapefile. And before I do that, I already know that this data frame is already set to zone 11, NAD 83, but we can just confirm that now. So let's bring in the shapefile that we just exported. And then we'll zoom to layer. And right away you can see that it does bound by an LSD, so chances are we're probably in the right location. So I have a subscription to IHS Wells, and pipelines. They're very accurate. Actually, I wanted to mention that to you too, is if you want to help pay for the subscription, I'd be willing to share that information at a drastically reduced cost. So let's go to Alberta, and here's the super pipes and then the surface hole wells. Okay, so for the wells, we can just label it based on the well name, and we'll confirm that it is in fact the same well that you're working on, the Hewitt well. So we'll just do that. Hewitt 626-43-1 West 5. So that looks perfect. Okay, so then we can just look at the contours. You know, the Z level, which is the elevation, is there, and everything is good. Okay, so we've confirmed that we're in the right location. Now what we can do is we can just take a quick identity of the location here for the LSDs, and we are in 43-1, 626, yeah. Yeah, LSD 6 of section 26. Yeah, so we just did all our checks here, so everything is lining up correctly. So we confirmed that we are in the right zone, so there's no issues with it transferring between zone 11 and zone 12 because it is close to that border. That shouldn't matter. If it's in one zone, it's in one zone, and that's it. Okay, so that's done. So now what we do is, now what we want to do is we want to export the image. And so there's a few things that we need to do to tidy this up to be able to do that. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is export the image itself. So with the image, we don't want the contours, we don't want the labels, we just want the raw image by itself, so that when we bring it into ArcGIS, we can manipulate the transparency, and there isn't this sort of superfluous information that we don't need on the maps when we create our maps. So the first thing I do is turn off all my axes, and I turn off the color scale, and I also turn off the contours themselves. So what we're going to do is turn these off. Okay, so now all we see is the raw image. The next thing that we need to do is, so we've already done the coordinate system. The next thing we need to do is we want to export this into, it's essentially a GeoTIFF format. So that it's a TIFF image with georeferencing properties. Now, the first thing you do is you go to File, Export, you set the image type as tagged image TIFF. Now make sure that this show options dialog is checked. So as you can see, there's no options here to change the properties of the export. But because this is checked on, it gives you that options dialog after you hit the file name. So we go to the file here, and we'll go image, and we'll call it test2, and we'll go save. And now it brings up the options, okay? So pixel dimensions, all that stuff, so you can change, you can make it 600 dpi, whatever you like. You can try that, make it super big. 24-bit color is very good, especially for our purposes. Spatial reference. Now, this is where you probably went wrong, is it defaults to the paper space, which is basically floating in the middle of nowhere. So what you need to do is you need to set it to the same base grid that you've created for this particular data set. So if we look at it, it's contours Hewitt 626 EM min curve. So we set it to that, and you want to make sure that the Esri world file is checked off. The GS reference is checked off. The rest of them basically just match what's here. The rest of them you won't need. Go to the TIFF options, no compression is fine. These are all pretty default. You can leave those the same. So we just go OK, and that's been exported. So now we can bring in that image. Test 2. And there's our image. Now we'll turn the contours off. Okay, and now you have a nice raw image So if we turn on, let's say, the base imagery, and naturally it takes a while. This Esri base imagery, as you know, takes a while. Sometimes it's more finicky than others. Okay, so let's just see if we can interrupt this. So now we go into display, and let's change our transparency to 50% so that we can see the underlying imagery. It's looking like my internet is slow today, so what we'll do is we'll take an export of this image and make a GeoTIFF so that we're not waiting. Everything else is fine. Put it in the same project folder. Call it Esri imagery. Okay, all done. Now we can turn that off and add our imagery. Okay, perfect. So now we'll just bring that down and we'll turn on our test tube. Okay, so everything appears to be lining up. We've got this sort of slew area which seems to correspond with the underlying imagery, so whatever this happens to be. So yeah, so we're feeling good about this. We're feeling good about the proximity. We've double checked the LSD, everything's in the right place. And now see we have a layer that we can have full control over. We don't have to worry about the legend getting in the way, trying to get that out of the way. We don't want the grids. We want just a bare raw image. Okay. So now that that's done, confirmed, everything's good. Now what we want to do is export the color scale to create a legend in ArcGIS. So we do basically the same thing. So now what we do is we only turn the color scale on, turn the grid off, and we export it as a TIFF again. Now, we don't necessarily need all of this other information. We could just show options and turn that off and remove all that stuff. But it's not going to hurt anything to include it, and it certainly doesn't increase the file size very much. So we'll just export it as legend, and we'll keep everything the same. Doesn't really matter. Okay, so then what I do is I bring that legend into some graphic program of some sort. I use Adobe Photoshop. I have a subscription. If you don't, GIMP is a good alternative. It's 100% free, very stable, and it works just like Photoshop. It's a little different, but for the most part, just like Photoshop, has all the same functions and is just as powerful. So we'll do it through GIMP, just in case you don't have Photoshop, and I'll show you the process to clean it up. Okay, so in here under Image, cropped content. So what that does is basically gets rid of all that extra white space. So once that's done, we just save it. Oh, sorry. The one thing that's a little bit odd about GIMP is that when you save it, it doesn't automatically save it as the original file format. It tries to save it as a native GIMP type format, which you don't typically want. So what you do is you use the overwrite legend.tiff option instead. And so you see down here, it gives you the message import or image exported to blah, blah, blah. So it's kept the same file name, doesn't create anything new that you don't need. And now it's cropped. So we'll discard changes. You don't need that. And now you can see that the legend is now cropped. So now what we do is we go into our legend, and I will go insert picture, go to the folder, insert the legend. Okay, and then I'll hold my shift key down to keep it sort of in place. Typically I put it right about here. And so you have some options here. What you can do is you can actually create some white space around it. So I do that fairly often. So what we'll do is we'll say, okay, we want a white background with a 0.5 outline, but we want it to be like a little bit bigger than the actual size. So let's say, I don't know, maybe make it 5. And then we'll match that for the border, 5 and 5, and see how that looks. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Now we need a little space up here at the top for some text. So let's add actually some space at the on the y-axis. So we'll make that, I don't know, make it 10. Yeah. Okay. Well, you get the idea anyway. So then what you want to do is then just put in some text, and you can go, you know, EM32 or whatever it happens to be. Stick it up here. And if you want to get fancy, just group it so that way you're not moving it independently. You can move it wherever you want. And Bob's your uncle. So now what we can do is we can zoom to that layer. You could bring in, now you bring in your boreholes and so on and so forth, and you're off to the races. So the keys in Surfer is when you're exporting, make sure that you're setting to the proper coordinate system. So when you go File, Export, and we call it 2, whatever, it doesn't matter. Make sure that when the spatial reference, just remember that always paper space is always the default. You want to make sure that you change that over to coordinates, over to contours. Now, I believe there's a way to change your paper space coordinate system to the same coordinate system of the actual data so that the default will match. But I'm not 100% sure how to do that. So what I would do is just skip that. Just be aware of those settings, and you'll be fine. So that's how I do it. You end up with a good result. Everything's nice and clean, exported at a high resolution, clean from all the extraneous features that you don't need. You've double checked your grid referencing, make sure that your contours match, and you should be good. All right, talk to you later.